Tom Yamas, live in Tel Aviv, where tonight Israel is warning its ground offensive could start at any moment.
And I'm Kate Snow in New York, where we're watching efforts by the Biden administration to get Americans out of the war zone.
Americans trapped in Gaza trying to get out through Egypt. The border there now scheduled to open in just hours. Inside Gaza, desperation as Israel ramps up its attacks. Residents warn they're running out of food and medicine.
They are facing a real risk of starvation if that continuous blockade continues on.
The U.S. sending a ship to evacuate Americans from Israel. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in the region trying to head off a broader war.
No one should do anything that widens this conflict in any way.
A U.S. Senate delegation on the ground here in Israel forced to take shelter when sirens went off. What Majority Leader Chuck Schumer told me he said directly to Israel's Prime Minister.
Tell Israel's leaders we have your back.
And we're with the Americans heading to war. Their emotional goodbyes with family as they travel to Israel to fight.
This is an NBC News special report. Israel and Hamas at war. Reporting tonight from Tel Aviv, Tom Yamas, and from New York, Kate Snow.
And good evening. It is 3 in the morning here in Israel, and a new phase of this war could start at any time. Israel's military saying it's prepared to fight on two fronts as clashes between the IDF and Hezbollah militants intensify on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. But in the south, Israeli troops still amassing along that border with Gaza as Israel vows a ground offensive to take out Hamas. In Gaza, hundreds of thousands of people heading south in an attempt to evacuate as a humanitarian situation there worsens. And late today, Palestinian officials confirming the Rafah crossing into Egypt, Gaza's only other land border besides Israel, will open in about 6 hours from now. Families have been waiting there for days trying to flee the violence, but tomorrow it could be complete chaos with so many trying to escape.
There's also a race tonight to get Americans out of both Israel and Gaza. An estimated 500 to 600 Palestinian Americans were in Gaza when this conflict began, and the U.S. says there are Americans among the hostages. They've now been held by Hamas for more than a week after that brutal attack inside Israel last weekend. Sources also confirming to NBC News that the U.S. is sending a ship to northern Israel with the ability to evacuate hundreds of American citizens living in Israel. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveling to neighboring Arab nations in an effort to prevent an even larger conflict.
And take a look at this. It is the toll of this war. Already more than 1,400 people have been killed in Israel and more than 2,600 in Gaza. At least 30 of the victims we know are Americans. An unimaginable number of victims already with no end in sight.
Tonight, Israeli clashes north and south of its borders. Attacks from Hezbollah in Lebanon leading to retaliation strikes, while rockets launch in and out of Gaza. The Israeli military is amassing troops and equipment along the border for a ground invasion that everyone knows is coming, but few know when it will start. Inside Gaza, a dire humanitarian crisis is growing. Water, food, fuel, and medical supplies are running out. Civilians trying to get to safety in the south while the bombardment continues. As the U.S. works to get Americans out of Gaza into Egypt through the southern border near Rafah, it's still closed. But a Palestinian official says it will open tomorrow morning, and the State Department says up to 600 Americans remain in Gaza. So far, negotiations between Egypt, Israel, and aid organizations over the border have gone nowhere as families wait in agony. This as Secretary of State Antony Blinken continues his shuttle diplomacy with a visit to Egypt today, working on all these issues.
We've come to work together as well to ensure that this crisis, this conflict doesn't spread to other places.
To help ensure that, a second U.S. aircraft carrier, the Eisenhower, will join the USS Gerald Ford already in the eastern Mediterranean. And inside Israel, relentless threats from the air. We were rushed to a bomb shelter as air raid sirens went off.
We experienced what life is like even here in Tel Aviv. About 20 of us, including my 6 senators, had to be herded into a shelter because there were missile attacks this afternoon. Thank God.
It also happened to the U.S. delegation here. Senators forced to take cover. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Mitt Romney in Tel Aviv, along with others, to meet with Israeli officials as well as families of Americans taken hostage by Hamas terrorists.
When you got off that plane, what was the first thing you wanted to tell Israel's leaders?
I wanted to tell Israel's leaders, we have your back.
Do you think there's hope to rescue American hostages?
Of course there is. That's why they were grabbed. Hamas wants to see if they can't get something.
Hope is all this family has. They haven't heard from their loved ones, Keith and Adrian Siegel, since Saturday. Neighbors saw Hamas terrorists march them from their home.
You met with the United States senators. What did you tell them?
We all told them that we want our families back in Israel and now. Tomorrow we haven't got time. We need them to bring them back to their homes, back to their children, back to their grandchildren.
Just some of the Americans who have loved ones that are now hostages being held by those Hamas terrorists. Tonight we have reporters fanned out all across the region. And first we want to take you now to the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, where those Israeli forces are preparing for an all-out assault on Hamas. Ellison Barber joins us now live from that tense border. Ellison, you've been reporting there for several days now, and you're in an area tonight where there's been heavy military movement. And I understand you've seen some equipment moving in just the last couple of hours.
Hey, Tom, yeah, that's right. We've seen that happen a lot in the last few days since we've been here. In the last couple of hours, we have seen 2 small convoys, and you may be seeing some flashing over behind my shoulder. That is Gaza just behind us. In the last little bit of time, we've started to see the skyline back there light up with the pockets of orange 3 times in probably the last 10 minutes. But for the most part, things here have been eerily quiet. I spoke to you around this time last night and said the same thing. But what we have been seeing are movements of military equipment. We saw 2 small convoys tonight of flatbed trucks. That was a boom off in the distance in Gaza just now. But the flatbed trucks we saw, they were carrying armed personnel carriers into the direction of Gaza. One thing that was different tonight compared to when we saw military equipment the other day, they didn't stop at a military staging area that's nearby here. They kept going and appeared to be headed straight for the Gaza border. Tom.
And Ellison, I know you've been talking to Israeli soldiers there where you are. They're essentially waiting for this invasion to begin. How are they feeling right now? What's the mood now?
Yeah, some of them are frustrated when they specifically talk about how all of this started, the terror attacks that unfolded on Saturday. They talk about their pain and their frustration. We met one IDF commander at a gas station not far from here today, and he wanted to talk to us. He talked about how frustrated he was that it took so long for the security forces to respond to the initial terror attack, and the fact that it has taken so many days, seemingly, for any sort of real offensive to go into Gaza to try and get the 100-plus people out from inside. Tommy looked at me and he said, I'm 32 years old. Me and many other men my age would walk into Gaza right now and say, take us, but let the women, let the children, let the elderly go. They are frustrated because you have over 100 people inside of Gaza still stuck, and so many of them, they really are very young, they are older, they are women, they are civilians who have nothing to do with any of the conflicts at play here. Tom?
Ellison Barber speaking to the soldiers and the families that are there on the front lines. Ellison, we thank you for your report. It's been over 48 hours since the Israeli military gave a warning to 1.1 million civilians in Gaza to evacuate in preparation for a ground offensive. Joining us tonight is the international spokesman for the Israeli Defense Force, Jonathan Conricus. Jonathan, I know your country is at war, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and our viewers tonight. There is news that the Rafah border in Egypt will be open for Palestinian foreign nationals, including Americans, to get out in just a few hours and for aid to come in. Can you tell us tonight, categorically, that there will be no bombing or shelling near this this area as people are trying to cross and humanitarian assistance is trying to get in.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for having me, and I'll repeat what I said that wasn't audible. We've already tried with the Egyptians and the Americans and others to coordinate the safe passage of Americans out of the Gaza Strip. We were for it, and of course made sure that there was no military activity of ours in the area, but it was stopped by Hamas. So it's very much up to Hamas to decide if they're going to allow and what is going to happen. Of course, anything humanitarian coordinated with Israel, with the government, or with the military will be respected clearly.
Jonathan, IDF is reporting that there are 126 hostages confirmed. These are people kidnapped by the terrorists of Hamas that unleash so much evil on your people. Has there been any communication between Hamas and Israel, or a third party like another country, on freeing those hostages?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I don't have to remind you about Gilad Shalit, but many of our viewers may not be as familiar. He was an Israeli soldier that Hamas kept hidden for 5 years. 5 long years. It took a prisoner swap of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners to get him back. What makes you think Hamas will negotiate with you or the U.S. for those American hostages?
What Hamas will do is of less concern, and without going into politics and strategy, I don't think that Israel is looking to negotiate. What we are going to do is to dismantle Hamas, its military leadership, its military capabilities, so that at the end of this war, Hamas doesn't have any military capability. And of course, it is our intention and commitment to the families of those held hostage to bring those Israelis home.
I know you're aware of that convoy of Palestinians that was struck. 70 people, including children, trying to flee Gaza. Palestinian media, there are reports that it wasn't an Israeli airstrike. I know Israel is denying those reports. What is your understanding of what happened, and was it an Israeli airstrike that killed those innocent Palestinians?
Well, we're in a war zone, and when in war, lots of things happen at the same time. War also encompasses the information realm. And what we have said unequivocally, Brigadier General Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, and everybody else, is that clearly we have not targeted any convoy, any civilians on that road, specifically on that road and nowhere else in general, but specifically to that location, clearly no purposeful targeting. It may have been an incident of fire around it, but that is very unlikely. And what I would want to bring to the fore is the fact that the Gaza Strip is governed by a territory. Yeah, I'd just like to complete and say.
Yeah, Jonathan, I just want to stop. Yeah, Jonathan. I just want to stop you for a moment, because it sounds a little different than what we've heard from Israeli officials. Are you saying there's still a possibility that it was indeed an Israeli airstrike? It might have been a mistake, but it might have been Israeli bombs that killed those 70 people?
So that was before, in the mid-sentence, that's where I was getting to. Gaza Strip is governed by a terrorist organization that has a long track record, proven record, of lying, falsifying, and dealing in misinformation. We assess that it is Hamas who in fact staged these explosions, and Hamas is responsible for what happened here. And at this stage, we have looked into the information provided by journalists. We have tried to corroborate questions and understand what happened. It is a very chaotic environment, and what I can say clearly, unequivocally, is that we did not, in any case, target any convoy. But I want to be on the safe side and say, things can happen in war, but there was definitely nothing purposeful. And I think that the investigation should be looking at who would stand to gain from such a convoy being attacked, specifically on the route that we made sure would be open for evacuation? And the answer is clear. The organization that stands to gain from this is Hamas, and unfortunately I don't think it would be beneath Hamas to attack their own civilians if they think that it would gain them anything in the realm of diplomacy or international public opinion.
Jonathan Conricus with the IDF. We thank you for your time tonight. Kate, I'm going to send it back over to you in New York.
All right, Tom, thank you. Just a few hours from now, that Rafah crossing on the southern end of Gaza bordering Egypt, we're told will open up as one of the only escape routes for foreign nationals, including Americans, inside of Gaza to get out of harm's way. A Palestinian official confirms to NBC News that will happen, but it's not clear how long it will stay open. Joining me now is Jeremy Bash. He's former chief of staff at the CIA and the Department of Defense and NBC News national security analyst. Jeremy, good to have you with us. Can you help our viewers? We have some maps. Help viewers understand this Rafah border crossing. How big is it? How hard would it be to get many people through that opening?
Yeah, it's not very big. Imagine the size of like an NFL stadium with hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions of people, or at least a million people trying to get in this area. Look at this map right here. You've got Gaza up here in the orange. You've got Egypt, a contiguous land border between Egypt and Gaza. This border crossing is the only land crossing that is available to Palestinians coming south through the Gaza Strip. Israel over here in yellow, there are two border crossings up north. But for the people of Gaza, when they get into Egypt, they're going to be obviously in a country that can take care of them, provide humanitarian assistance for them.
All right, let's talk about reporting in the New York Times tonight that says that the goal of Israel's military goal, is to capture Gaza City. I think we have a different map. Gaza City is up in the northern part of the country. So walk us through that. If that is the goal, right in the middle of the evacuation zone, what does that mean?
Sure. Again, here, Israel in green, Gaza in orange. At the north end of Gaza City, at the north end of the Gaza Strip is Gaza City. The population is going to be evacuating south out of this red area, down into the orange area, and then ultimately, potentially, some of them will leave through Egypt.
Although not yet, right? To be clear, right now it's just those who have foreign passports.
That's right. And ultimately, there will be humanitarian support that will go in through the Rafah crossing from the green to the orange, and the population there will hopefully get some humanitarian relief. Israel's military objectives, Kate, I think it's important to note, is to try to isolate Gaza City and not to bulldoze the entirety of the Gaza civilian areas. Rather, they're going after specific targets. You can see here in the dark colors, specific areas where Hamas is assessed to have command and control, where they're assessed to have their weapons caches, their rocket factories. And I think this is a very important point. Israel's military operation is not just to bulldoze a town. It's to go specifically intelligence-driven after specific points you see here on the map.
Those black areas that you see on the map are where airstrikes from Israel have created damage, or some sort of...
And it's likely that those darker areas on the map here in black is where you will see ground operations, naval fires, long-range fires, drone strikes, and ground troops dismounted off of armored personnel carriers to go house to house to try to find hostages and track down Hamas terrorists.
While I have you, I want to ask about Secretary Blinken. Secretary of State has been all over the region over the last several days. We have a map of where he's been. This is shuttle diplomacy, right? This is going to talk with lots of different players. What's the goal?
The goal here is to ensure that Iran doesn't jump in, and he's gone to Egypt to talk about humanitarian assistance for the Gazans. He's talked to Qatar over here in the Persian Gulf to talk about how to negotiate with Hamas. They have a lot of influence with Hamas, potentially get the hostages out. He's gone to the United Arab Emirates and to Saudi Arabia and to Jordan. Other Gulf and Arab allies and partners of the United States, they actually work cooperatively with Israel. They do not want to see a wider war. But I think, Kate, it's important to note that if Iran jumps into this through their proxy Hezbollah in the northern part of Israel, up there at the top of that yellow area.
Operates in southern Lebanon.
That's right, in southern Lebanon, at the top of that yellow part of Israel. If Hezbollah jumps in, that will essentially be a war between Israel and Iran. That's why we've got our carrier strike group in the eastern Mediterranean, right near Israel, in that waterway there. That's to deter Iran from jumping into this war.
Thank you so much. Very helpful to see it and talk about it. Jeremy Bash, appreciate it. Still ahead tonight, the Americans stuck in Gaza. I'll talk with a dad and grandfather here in the U.S., hoping his daughter's family will get out. Plus, as we go to break tonight, we hear from some of the voices of this war on both States said.
They're basically bombing everywhere. It's literally a humanitarian crisis.
Just trying to help those who have been called up to the front lines, who have been displaced from their homes.
Welcome back to NBC News' special report on the war between Israel and Hamas. I'm Tom Yamas, live in Tel Aviv. And right now, a second aircraft carrier, the USS Eisenhower, is speeding towards the Mediterranean to join the USS Ford off of Israel as part of the U.S.'s response. And tonight, right now, I'd like to bring in our NBC News national security correspondent, Courtney Kuby. So, Courtney, explain to our viewers what the role of these two U.S. warships sitting off of Israel really is right now.
So right now, it really comes down to one word, and that is deterrence. We just heard Jeremy Bash talking about this exactly. There is a real concern throughout the world, especially here in the United States, that this war could spread into a regional conflict, that it could simply move outside the borders of Israel and Gaza. And that's the real message that the U.S. is sending with the aircraft carrier strike group, the USS Gerald R. Ford. It also has destroyers and a cruiser. And now the Eisenhower, as you mentioned, Tom, is speeding towards the eastern Mediterranean with the associated ships with it. In addition to that, the U.S. also sent forward attack and fighter aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft. So this is all about ensuring that anyone who might be considering, any group or nation who might be considering going in and trying to help Hamas, the administration continues to tell us the one word that they have for them is don't.
Let's speak about Hamas now and this impending ground invasion that could happen at any moment. We have kept hearing about these tunnels, and I know we have video to show our viewers about how Hamas operates underneath Gaza. They have essentially an entire city, sort of like the Viet Cong did during Vietnam. And we know that during that time, you know, people had to go in there essentially with a .45 and a flashlight and try to fight it out in the tunnels. How has time changed, and is that type of warfare essentially the same, except now in an urban environment?
It's similar. So now there's some surveillance capabilities that will give the Israelis, with support from other nations, including the U.S., a little bit of a better picture of what might be underneath those tunnels. But it's still an extremely murky picture. And then when you add to that the fact that there are hostages, civilians who may have been taken down into those tunnels, who may be spread out through this enormous, massive network of tunnels that's all underneath Gaza, that only complicates the factor. In addition to that, there's also the complicating factor of concern, according to U.S. officials who we've been speaking with, that some of the Hamas fighters may have already tried to flee through those tunnels, maybe even taking some of those hostages with them, Tom.
All right, Courtney Kuby with us. Courtney, we appreciate that. Kate, I'm going to send it back to you in New York.
Okay, Tom, thank you. There are around 500 or 600 American citizens still in Gaza tonight, according to the State Department. That includes the daughter of our next guest. Her name is Emily Rauschenberger. Her family was visiting Gaza when the war erupted. Emily was born in the U.S. Her 5 children are U.S. citizens, too. Her husband is Palestinian and a British citizen. Emily's father, John Rauschenberger, joins me now. John, good to see you again. You and I first spoke on Thursday, and you were really worried. I know that it's been hard to reach Emily this weekend, but I understand, I know you were able to talk with her this morning. How are they all doing?
They're doing quite well under the circumstances. My daughter's quite forceful and focused and steely-eyed, if you will, in keeping my 5 grandkids under control as a full-time job. But she's very optimistic, and they've been through the Rafah boarding in the past when they delivered when they visited her husband's olive tree farm over in the southeast corner. So I think she knows what she's getting involved in. It's just, when will they open up the border?
Yeah. And John, I know that they were there to visit her husband's family. As you said, they have an olive farm. They've been moving around a lot within Gaza the last few days. You told us that they're now staying in a 3-bedroom apartment with 31 people in it. What are her biggest concerns as she waits to try to get out of Gaza potentially tomorrow?
She shared with me, she had kind of a blackout for about 36, 38 hours. We couldn't connect with her. Just talked with her the first time this Sunday morning for about 20 minutes. Their biggest concern is an errant rocket. They do not have, there's not street fighting going on in the southern end of Gaza. They're very close to the border, and they are more concerned about, again, errant rocket. They went one night without any rockets. I think that would have been Friday night, but Saturday, or last night, if you will, there was two rocket hits on a building within her area, she said. And of course, they still felt the concussion. So she knows they have to be somewhere. But her biggest safety concern at this point in time is an errant rocket. But she did say, Dad, we're not having the fighting in the South. They have.
Yeah, it's different in the South. I know a Palestinian official, as we have said, says the Rafah crossing, the only way out right now, will open tomorrow morning. You told us your daughter's family waited 10 hours at that crossing the other day when they went. What else did she say about that experience, and is she planning to go tomorrow?
Well, she'll be there tomorrow, I promise. But the first day that they said it was open, from noon to 5, so they were in queue at 7 a.m. And of course, over the course of the day, the border crossing did not open. But she said it wasn't necessarily chaotic, but it was crowded. People were kind and generous to each other, and that fortunately there were a lot of kids, and there were Canadians, there were French, there were other UK foreign nationals connected with, and they talked with, and the kids got to play with, believe it or not. But it was, quite warm, to say the least, as it is in Gaza. But what she's worried about, if they don't get out soon, is the wave of refugees coming from the north could just overwhelm the area. Yeah. So we're getting word, and as I talked to you a little bit earlier today, we're getting word that they're going to open up tomorrow. Earlier, I think they said at 9. And that foreign nationals are going to be the first ones out, God bless. So as much as I want the Americans and my daughter and 5 grandkids and son-in-law out, we're happy to hear they're going to let the British and the Canadians and the French and the Germans, because so many people found themselves in Gaza through no fault of their own. Humanitarian workers visiting 3rd and 4th generation families. So we're keeping our fingers crossed and saying prayer, etc., etc.
John, I know as a grandpa, you told me earlier that your daughter is telling you not to worry. I'm guessing you're a little worried right now.
Yeah, she said, Dad, it's not as bad as you think. No, Mom, relax.
Right, but that's hard. That's hard. Listen, we will keep you in our thoughts and hope that she and the family get out safely. John, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We're back in a moment with a look at the stunning arsenal Hamas left behind after its attack on Israel. But first, as we go to break, the voices of this war.
Everyone I know has had people that they know identified as among the killed, taken hostage, or called up for reserve duty.
I know all I'm thinking about is my family, how I'm gonna help them to go in a safe place.
Back from Tel Aviv with our NBC News special report on the war between Israel and Hamas. Tonight we're getting our first look at the stunning firepower those Hamas terrorists used to attack Israel last week. Raf Sanchez now with the weapons of war Hamas will use and Israel will be up against.
Tonight, a first look at the deadly arsenal Hamas terrorists used to storm into Israel, and a sign of the firefight that lies ahead. Hamas fighters burst through the border fence equipped not just to kill civilians, but also to fight off Israeli tanks and helicopters. Here, a terrorist fires a rocket-propelled grenade. We saw dozens of the same weapon today at an Israeli military base, where arms recovered from Hamas fighters are being analyzed. Rockets, mines, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles, and a magnetic bomb that sticks to the side of a tank.
They brought around 2,000 terrorists in here with hundreds of vehicles.
This Israeli major spoke with us on the condition we not use his name.
Does any of this indicate the direct involvement of Iran?
Not yet. Most of the munition that you see here is a local production of Hamas.
Despite Israel's strict blockade, this Hamas video shows it still makes weapons inside Gaza at factories like this.
This is a thermobaric bomb which creates heat instantly up to 3,000 degrees Celsius. The Israeli military says Hamas terrorists use this to incinerate entire families.
For all their weapons, Hamas is still badly outgunned. And it has no answer to Israel's overwhelming air power. But on the ground in Gaza, they'll have a home field advantage, an elaborate network of tunnels designed to allow them to pop out and ambush Israeli troops. A looming battle that promises to be brutal.
Now, Israel has specialized sensors to detect these Hamas tunnels underground, and it uses so-called bunker buster bombs to try to take them out from the air. But some of these tunnels are nearly 100 feet deep and very difficult to destroy. Tom.
Raf Sanchez for us tonight. Raf, thank you. Coming up, the call of duty. The Americans heading off to help fight with Israel, like so many are now going. Welcome back. We are live in Tel Aviv tonight. I'm Tom Yamas, and you are watching an NBC News special report. As so many scramble to leave this region amidst the growing violence, others are running towards the danger. They're Americans, bound by a commitment to community, country, and faith. Tonight, Megan Fitzgerald shares just a few of their stories.
As Israel ramps up its offensive against Hamas, calling up thousands of reservists to fight. 3, 2, 1. Scenes like this are playing out in airports across the U.S. People answering the call, leaving the U.S. to fight in Israel in an emotional moment at LAX.
I just dropped my little brother off to go back to the army in Israel. I'm heartbroken and I'm so scared for him.
Noy Leib is already back in Israel.
So today's the day, on the way to base.
Documenting his trip on social media.
I made my way up north to say bye to my grandpa and my parents.
Leaving his job and life in New York, he didn't even wait for the call.
I actually booked my flight to Israel before I got called back because I knew what was going to happen. There's no way that I was going to sit at home.
Andrew Silberman was visiting his family in Chicago last weekend. Then he heard what was happening in Israel and got a call that his close friend had been killed. We spoke to him earlier this week.
And from there, the rest of the day became about me trying to get on a flight back to Tel Aviv.
It didn't matter to Andrew that he had not been called up. He was determined to go.
It was important to me to come back as soon as possible just to see what I could do.
His plans to return to college in Israel now on hold.
I think people are really using this as an opportunity to come together and help each other.
Ruben Baryadin's son, Zev, leaving behind his 1-year-old son and pregnant wife in Texas.
He called me to tell me I decided I'm going to Israel to rejoin my army unit.
Zev quickly arriving in Israel and meeting up with his unit.
He's doing his duty, and I am extremely proud of him.
This sense of duty is at the heart of the Israeli army and its mandatory service.
Technically, it's actually national service, not necessarily military service. The overwhelming majority do go into Israel's military.
Most Israelis enter the military at 18 and serve for 2 to 3 years. Typically, after that, they are automatically put into the reserves, which can continue into their 40s and beyond, ready to answer the call.
If an Israeli is living in America and she hears that her unit was called up, she might decide to drop everything and go and join. Naturally, if you're living overseas, you're not required to come back, but certainly the IDF appears very ready to take on everyone who's willing to come back.
And then there are people like Josh Jacobson, out of the reserves and wanting to help. He left the U.S. to see if he could join up again and fight.
It just felt like so weird to be in Boston when there's so much going on here. I just felt like that was kind of my duty as part of the collective nation of Israel to come back and just help.
Israelis coming together, leaving their homes around the world to answer the call. Megan Fitzgerald, NBC News, London.
And as the world waits for the Israeli-Hamas war to enter a new phase, a more deadlier phase, if you will, with Israeli defense forces preparing for an expected ground invasion of Gaza, eyes are also on the border with Lebanon. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now live from that region. Matt, there have been clashes between the IDF and Hezbollah on Israel's northern border. Walk our viewers through what happens if Hezbollah does enter this war.
Yeah, well, Tom, what we saw today was anti-tank missiles, according to the IDF, fired from the Lebanese side where I'm standing now, over the border, which is just over that ridge over there, towards the Israelis. It killed, according to the IDF, 1 civilian. Now, this bookends a week of deadly fighting. It's been on a kind of a simmer all week long. All it takes, as you mentioned, is for someone to take a more of a bigger step, and the whole thing could very easily boil over. Because we've seen on this border intermittent fighting for much of the past week, for much of the past several decades. This is a tense border, and one that's been disputed for a very, very long time. Hezbollah is the dominant force here in southern Lebanon, and like Hamas, they are backed by Iran. They're a militant and political group, and they have the capability to muscle up and put up a big resistance against Israel and attack them on the offense, which they've done in the past. And they can do that for days, weeks, months at a time. And that's why this makes this situation so incredibly volatile. Tom?
It could be the second front in this war. All right, Matt Bradley for us. Matt, we appreciate that. Stay with us. Coming up right after this break, the powerful conversations with families on both sides of the Israel-Gaza border.
Like Israelis are literally bombing everywhere.
Welcome back. Throughout this broadcast, we've been bringing you short clips from people living in Gaza, living in Israel, their perspectives and personal stories about what life has been like this past week. Everyone from moms and dads to doctors, even kids, feeling the impact of this war. We take a moment now for their stories in their own words. An American who moved to Israel with her husband.
There are not words to explain how it feels to open your social media and see your loved ones or your loved ones' friends, family, etc. being slaughtered, burned, raped, taken hostage into Gaza by the Hamas terrorists. I'm praying for a swift end to this conflict.
A young woman living in Gaza.
It's been a few days, but I'm already drained, and this feels like eternity. Entire neighborhoods I've been over existence. One neighborhood at a time. And right now, we're just waiting on our turn sooner or later.
A mother and her children in Tel Aviv under constant fear of attack.
I think that for the first time in my life, I cannot find words either in English or in Hebrew to explain the magnitudes of the feelings and emotions that I've gone through in the last week. I think that the hardest thing as a parent is to know exactly the extent of the atrocities that have happened, but to try to keep your kids out of this.
A doctor treating patients in Gaza.
I'm trying to deal with patients. We have maybe 10 times the capacity of the hospital. Overloaded with patients. 10 times the beds. The people, patients are in the corridors, in the streets. They are evacuating them because there is no other beds, any other casualties come to the hospital. I can't work in here.
A new mother in Israel worried about her son's future.
I'm in Jerusalem. My parents, our apartment in Tel Aviv does not have a bowel shelter, and I cannot watch a 15-day-old by myself, and I feel like I'm not allowed to feel anything. I need to keep it together and stay calm for him, and just
student in Gaza trying to get her family to safety.
I've witnessed so many aggressions on Gaza, but yet have I ever seen anything this aggressive. This time I'm doubting that I make it out alive. All my friends have either lost their house, a family member. This time there's no safe place around. Yesterday we have to evacuate the whole building. I have to leave my room, my house, and my memories to go to a place that is no safer than my house. So we had to return back home because if I'm gonna die in my house.
So many civilians caught up in this war and fears that it's about to get worse for many. We're back with more of our NBC News special after this break. Tonight, President Biden speaking out what he said about humanitarian aid for Gaza and U.S. military involvement in this war.
Good evening, I'm Tom Yamas in Tel Aviv, just miles from the Gaza border, where tonight Israeli troops stand ready to invade at any moment.
And I'm Kate Snow in New York, where we are closely watching efforts to get Americans trapped in Gaza and Israel back home safely.
Americans inside Gaza racing to escape through a checkpoint on the Egyptian border, set to open in just hours. Catastrophic scenes across Gaza tonight. Neighborhoods flattened by Israeli airstrikes. Residents now running out of food and clean water.
Gaza is being strangled, and it seems that the war right now has lost its humanity.
The U.S. sending a large ship to evacuate Americans from Israel as the Biden administration tries to head off a larger conflict.
Anyone thinking of taking advantage of the situation, I have one word: don't.
A U.S. Senate delegation on the ground here in Israel forced to take shelter when sirens went off. We pressed them tonight about those Americans still believed to be held hostage by Hamas.
What is your understanding of how the U.S. can help in any way to free those American hostages?
And the stark warning from the FBI tonight about the possibility of lone actors carrying out copycat attacks on American soil.
This is an NBC News special report. Israel and Hamas at war. Reporting tonight from Tel Aviv, Tom Yamas, and from New York, Kate Snow.
Good evening. It is 4 in the morning here in Israel, and less than 50 miles from where we are, Israeli troops are preparing for a ground invasion that could begin at any moment. A steady stream of tanks rolling towards Israel's border with Gaza as Israel vows to take out Hamas in retaliation for last weekend's attack that saw civilians brutally murdered, raped, and kidnapped. Israeli forces also clashing with Hezbollah militants on the country's border with Lebanon. The IDF says they are prepared to fight a war on two fronts. The war, take a look, has already left more than 1,400 dead in Israel and more than 2,600 dead in Gaza.
Back here in the U.S., a chilling alert from the FBI. The agency saying there are increased threats to Jewish people and Muslims here in the U.S. The FBI warning of possible violence from lone actors. Tonight, a deadly stabbing in Illinois, now being investigated as a hate crime. As we come on the air, there's also a major effort underway to help American citizens in both Israel and Gaza get out. A U.S. ship with the capacity to hold hundreds of people expected to pick up Americans from Israel tomorrow.
However, Kate, as you know, for those in Gaza, getting out has been nearly impossible. The only other land border besides Israel, the Rafah crossing into Egypt, that has not been operational. But now we're hearing it's set to open in about 5 hours. Still, with resources cut off and Gaza's infrastructure flattened, it's unlikely the most vulnerable there will be able to escape Israel's new offensive. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel reports from the Israel-Gaza border tonight.
Palestinians know time is running out to escape northern Gaza, and that once Israeli troops invade to fight Hamas here, these streets will become death traps. So they're heading south, amid rumors there could be a safe zone there. But not everyone can pack up and go. The Mabaret Rahmeh orphanage may house the most vulnerable people in all of northern Gaza now. It's home for 22 children. 12 of them have special needs. Their lives were difficult before. Now they're in the Ayas is 9 years old. He's blind and has profound disabilities. Maria is 7 years old and can only scoot. And as the staff here leave for safety, these children are only being cared for by 2 people. These children can't get out of the way of the coming ground war. 11-year-old Mohammed is building a house with blocks, while outside, airstrikes are destroying houses. Palestinians have been reluctant to leave northern Gaza because they're afraid they'll get bombed on the roads. After 70 Palestinians were killed Friday when medical officials say an Israeli airstrike hit a convoy of civilians. The Israeli military today said it didn't carry out the strike and accused Hamas of planting a bomb in the road to frighten civilians in northern Gaza to stay so they can be human shields.
The attack was not conducted by the IDF, and it appears that Hamas once again has sacrificed the people of Gaza for its diabolical aims.
The Israeli military released an image of what it says is a Hamas roadblock. Many in Gaza do not support Hamas, but people appear to be rallying around the group as Israeli airstrikes kill the militants and civilians around them. Today, Palestinian medical workers gathered 100 bodies. Written on the bags is the word unknown, unidentified victims about to be buried in mass graves. The horrors of war in the Middle East, with its terrorism and human tragedies, have come roaring back and may soon get far worse.
The pace of people moving south today did increase, according to the Israeli military, which is monitoring this closely. Of the roughly 1.1 million people who live in northern Gaza, about 600,000 moved to the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Tom?
So many, though, in that zone where the war may start. Richard, we thank you for that. The U.S. has been actively working to make sure this conflict does not expand to other parts of the region. In an interview today with NBC's Ali Arouzi, the Hamas representative in Iran was asked about the possibility of whether Hamas could get involved if Israeli troops enter Gaza. Here's what he said.
I don't know about Hezbollah, but at least the Iranian foreign minister in his United Nations speech, they have said that we will not allow this thing to continue the killing of the Palestinians. We are on the side of the Palestinians, and he warned the Israeli sides that if they do this incursion or land advance with their air forces, that will not be good news for them.
He also warned that other countries that are supported by Iran are carefully watching events and ready to react depending on what happens. Okay, I'll send it back to you in New York for now.
Okay, Tom, thank you. A senior U.S. official confirms that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has invited President Biden to travel to Israel and that the White House is considering that request. Joining us now, Gabe Gutierrez, who's our senior White House correspondent. Gabe, what is the latest on getting Americans out of the war zone?
Kate, the first of the Biden administration's charter flights to get Americans out of Israel is landed in Athens, and a ship is expected to depart from an Israeli port to Cyprus tomorrow. The White House is in hour-by-hour discussions with its Israeli counterparts to try and secure the safe release of U.S. hostages in Gaza. And in an interview that just aired on CBS's 60 Minutes, President Biden was asked about how to prevent civilian casualties there.
Are you asking Israel to establish a humanitarian corridor in that area or get humanitarian supplies?
Yes, our team is talking to them about that and whether there could be a safe zone. We're also talking with the Egyptians, whether there's an outlet to get these children and women out out of that area at this moment. But it's hard.
You would like to see a humanitarian corridor that allows some of the 2 million Gazans out of the area?
Yes.
You would like to see humanitarian supplies brought into Gaza?
Yes.
So you do not agree with the Israeli total siege of the Gaza Strip?
I'm confident that Israel is going to act under the rules of war.
The president said any Israeli occupation of Gaza would be a big mistake. He also reiterated that so far there is no clear evidence that Iran was directly behind the Hamas attack, but his administration has called Iran broadly complicit for funding Hamas for U.S. has now sent 2 carrier strike groups to the region to act as a deterrent against Iran, Hezbollah, and other enemies of Israel. But right now, the president is downplaying the possibility of any American boots on the ground.
Can you foresee U.S. troops in combat in this new Middle East war?
I don't think that's necessary. Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country. I guarantee we're going to provide them everything they need.
Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is expected back in Israel tomorrow. As you mentioned, Kate, according to a U.S. official, the White House is now considering whether the president himself might go at some point after an invitation from Prime Minister Netanyahu. Kate?
Kate Gutierrez at the White House. Let's go back to my colleague Tom Yamas in Tel Aviv. Tom?
All right, Kate, thank you. At this hour, the U.S. State Department says 13 Americans are still missing, and we know at least some of them have been taken hostage by Hamas. Tonight, pressure is growing on the American government to rescue any Americans being held by Hamas and evacuate those that are still trapped in Israel. Joining us live right now in this hour for more on how the U.S. may be able to get Americans in harm's way back home, I want to bring in P.J. Crowley, former Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at the State Department during the Obama administration. P.J., thanks so much for being here tonight. So I want to start off with, I've spoken to these families, right? They're Israeli-American. They have lost their loved ones. They are somewhere in Gaza, likely underground, possibly being tortured right now. Is there any chance at all American troops will help rescue those Americans?
Tom, that's always an option, but I think the United States will pursue diplomacy first. We don't have relationships with Hamas, but other countries have channels of communication with them, and I'm sure that countries like Qatar, Egypt, others are communicating with Hamas, to try to determine, where the hostile, who they have, and what their terms might be. At the same time, we're directing intelligence assets to try to figure out who holds Americans and other citizens, and where are they. We obviously have to know that kind of information, try to figure out if any military option is even feasible.
PJ, is there any leverage here? I was speaking with a spokesperson for the IDF earlier in the last hour. He told me there is no negotiation with Hamas. So then my question to you is, what type of leverage does the international community have? Does Hamas care about money? Do they care about prisoner swaps? Or is this simply going to be a rescue mission?
Well, sadly, hostages have value while they're alive. And obviously for a group like Hamas, the question is, what do they want? It may well be that they are using hostages to try to, put boundaries around the upcoming Israeli military operation. They might look at how to trade hostages for certain kinds of humanitarian assistance, things that I think we can and will be doing anyway. But Hamas may not be the only group holding hostages. So, this is very difficult at this point to try to figure out, where they are, who holds them, and what might the terms of the deal be.
PJ, how much does the Rafah border crossing concern you right now? We know in just a few hours it's going to reopen, and it's the only place that some Palestinians will be able to escape out of Gaza, namely Palestinian Americans. And I ask you about the concern because it is the only way out, and it's the only way for aid to come in. And I remember when the Ukraine war broke out, I was on the Polish border, and I'll never forget what I saw there. Men, women, and children trying to push their way through the border gates to get to safety. This was days after the war, and there were various border crossings in Ukraine. Here, there's only one right now. What do you think is going to happen in a few hours?
Well, I think in the short term, there's going to be chaos. I mean, the complexity here is, in most crises, there's an American embassy there to try to organize some sort of orderly evacuation. We don't have any boots on the ground on the Gaza side of the fence. Obviously, Secretary Blinken's been in the region. He had a good conversation with the Egyptians today. He'll have a conversation with the Israelis tomorrow. They're trying to establish this humanitarian corridor, which can be a mechanism to get aid into Gaza and people out of Gaza. But it's going to take some time for that to operate the way that we want it to. So I do think we'll have assets on the Egyptian side that can be helpful here. The dilemma is, people have to get from where they are in Gaza to that Rafah crossing and be able to be in a position to be rescued.
We'll know soon. All right, PJ Crowley first. PJ, we appreciate all your analysis. Efforts to get Americans out of danger in the region and supporting Israel are priorities for the Biden administration and for high-ranking senators on both sides of the aisle. So I want to continue my conversation from Tel Aviv today with Senators Chuck Schumer and Mitt Romney about Israel's battle against Hamas.
Senator Schumer, when you got off that plane, what was the first thing you wanted to tell Israel's leaders?
I wanted to tell Israel's leaders, we have your back during these awful times with one of the worst terrorist incidents that we have ever seen. We wanted the Israeli people to know that America stands with them. We understand their pain. We understand their need to make sure they eliminate the threat from Hamas once and for all, so that you can make sure that Hamas never can rear its ugly head again, and that the hostages are free.
What is your understanding of how the U.S. can help in any way to free those American hostages?
We're working very, very hard through many different channels. It wouldn't be appropriate to go into them here, to put pressure on Hamas to release the hostages.
You've seen the photos of the terrorist attack that happened here a week ago. What did you think?
I can't get, my stomach is wrenched to see the viciousness, the brutality of Hamas was just devastating. And one other thing, we experienced what life is like even here in Tel Aviv. About 20 of us, including all 6 senators, had to be herded into a shelter because there were missile attacks this afternoon. Thank God none of them hit.
Have you seen the images out of Gaza? And what was your message to Israel on somehow defending itself, eliminating Hamas, but trying to save as many lives as they can, civilian lives?
The message is, it's a difficult task, but we will give you whatever you need to achieve it. We met with the defense minister, and we have a long list of things they need. And as leader of the Senate, I'm going to move a package on the Senate floor ASAP to get Israel what it needs, and we will have broad bipartisan support.
You arrive in the country, and you immediately have to go to a shelter?
We had a meeting at this hotel, and the alarms went off and said, take shelter. And so we all rushed into a room which is secure and took shelter.
What have your thoughts been? You saw the images of what happened in Israel, the attack more than a week ago. What did you think when you saw that? And we're talking about babies being killed.
It's a level of depravity you haven't seen from humanity since the Middle Ages. It's the nature of what's happening with this group Hamas and terror groups like them.
What was your message to the Israeli leaders? What did you want to tell them?
Well, we want to tell them that we're with them.
Did the American delegation express the concern about civilian lives in Gaza, and were the Israelis receptive to that?
Yeah, the Israelis actually came at us pretty aggressively and said, we do not do revenge, but it's really Hamas that's killing both Jews and Palestinians, because Hamas is using their civilians as human shields and preventing them from going to safe places. So Hamas is really a perpetrator of harm on both sides.
You're going to meet with the families of these people who have lost family members, who have family members are hostages. You're a man of faith. This is a different faith. What are you going to tell them?
We're going to do everything we can to help return their loved one if that's humanly possible.
Do you think there's hope to rescue American hostages?
Of course there is. That's why they were grabbed. Hamas wants to see if they can get something. Hopefully they still have the capacity to free those people, and I understand that people in Qatar are doing their very best to facilitate that process.
My conversations with Senators Mitt Romney and Chuck Schumer from earlier today. When we come back, where will the Palestinians go with orders to leave Gaza? Finding an escape route is nearly impossible. We'll take a closer look, plus the voices of war from both sides.
I'm sorry for the people in Gaza, but it's important to understand that they're being terrorized by Hamas.
It's nothing new. It's actually very old. From year to year and from here to here. There's a hard life.
Welcome back to our special report on the war between Israel and Hamas. I'm Kate Snow in New York. Tonight, many Palestinians are facing an unthinkable decision. Leave their homes behind, not sure where they'll end up, or risk their lives by staying where they are. Joining us now is Bobby Ghosh. She's a Bloomberg opinion columnist covering foreign affairs. Bobby, nice to have you with us. Thank you. I want to ask first about what we've been talking about all night. The Rafah Gate in southern Gaza is the only way out. Hours from now, about 5 hours from now, it may open for people who have foreign passports only. What is that going to look like? How do people even get there?
Well, if you remember the exodus from Afghanistan last year, when thousands and thousands of Afghans were trying to get out of one airport. We all remember the scenes of pandemonium. I fear something similar will happen. We're saying that only people with foreign passports can come through there. But how do you keep others away from approaching that same gate? How do you keep women and children who are desperate to get out? How do you keep them? You can't fire on people. How do you do crowd control in the middle of a panic?
And if you look at the whole of Gaza Strip, they're telling people from the north all to come down to that one spot, Rafah.
And not just that, they're asking people to run through a gauntlet here. It's not just that there are two roads, but it's a war zone. So the bombs going off, the people have to worry about not only death from the skies, but also from the ground. They have to worry about Hamas preventing them from moving forward. Hamas needs human shields. That's been part of their operational procedure forever and ever. They're not going to be happy to just let people leave, no matter what they say officially. So people are running through two different kinds of threats, from the ground and from the air.
Yeah. So let's say, hypothetically, a whole bunch of Palestinian civilians do make their way to Rafah and can get out. Does Egypt want them there? Where do they ultimately end up?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. First of all, we have to acknowledge that a lot of Palestinians are not going to want to leave because they're afraid that if they do leave, they'll never be allowed back. Remember, many of these
It's their home.
It's their home. They're descended, many of these people, the majority, are descended from refugees from other places.